Hello and welcome back. Now, we'd like patrolling behavior for our drones, which means we need some sort of patrol point for our drones to move to. So in this video, we're going to talk about how we're going to create some patrol points and how those are going to work. And once we create these patrol points, we'd like to be able to visualize them in the world. So we're going to learn how we can draw debug spheres at the locations of the patrol points. Now, for a patrol point, we can simply create a basic actor. We can call this patrol point. Now, if we set this patrol point actor as the goal actor for our drone pawn, the drone will move to this point. Now, once it moves to this point, we'd like it to move to the next point. We can accomplish this by giving our simple patrol point actor a single variable. We can call this next point, and its data type can be patrol point. So if our first patrol point has a variable called next point, that next point can store the value of another patrol point. And once our drone reaches that point, it can then look at this next point variable and set that as its new goal target. At this point, the drone will move to the next patrol point. And we can continue this. Our next patrol point can have its own next point, which can store the value of another patrol point. And we can continue this pattern. A data structure like this is known as a linked list, where each point or node in the list has a reference to the next point in the list. Our last patrol point can even have its own next point. And if it points to the first patrol point, we have a loop, and this is known as a circular linked list. So once we've set up our patrol points, we can set our drone pawn's goal actor to the first point. And as soon as it reaches that point, it can start moving to the next point. And when it reaches that point, it'll move to the next point. And if the next point for this third patrol point points back to the first one, then our drone will move back to the beginning. So it'll patrol in this loop forever. Now, we don't have to have a loop. If our third patrol point points back to the second one, then the drone would simply go back to that second one, at which point it would turn around and go back to the third and keep moving back and forth between the second and third patrol points. So let's make this patrol point actor. So I have my drone folder open, and so far all we have is the drone pawn. I'd like to make the patrol point actor. So let's right-click and create a new blueprint class. And we're going to select actor and simply call this patrol point. Now let's open our patrol point, and this actor is going to be very simple. We're not going to add any components or functionality. In fact, we can delete these nodes here in the event graph, and our patrol point doesn't even need to tick. We don't need the tick event being called every frame. So if we select patrol point self, here in the details panel, we see under actor tick, this start with tick enabled. And if we uncheck that, then our patrol point won't even tick, and that'll save us on some performance. Now, our patrol point simply needs a single variable. So we're going to add a new variable here, and we're going to call this next point. And the data type for next point is going to simply be patrol point. So we can search for patrol point and choose patrol point and choose object reference. Now, each patrol point has a next point. So let's compile this and drag a couple of patrol points into the world. I'm going to drag one in right here and one right here. So we have two patrol points. Now I still have my second patrol point selected here. And in the details panel, I can search for next point. And of course, I don't see it here because I need to go back to patrol point and select next point and make sure to click on the eye icon to make this variable visible. Now, if I compile and go back to the level, I see next point. Now, I want this patrol point's next point to store a reference to the first patrol point and vice versa. And I can set this next point here. Notice there's a dropdown. And right next to the dropdown, we have this dropper icon. And if we hover over it, it says pick actor from scene, which means I can choose an actor from the scene to be this next point. So I'm going to scoot on over to the other point. I still have this point over here selected, and I'm going to click on the dropper tool, and my cursor says pick an actor by clicking on it. And if I hover over this other point, I get the dropper icon and I can click it. And now my next point has the value patrol point. That's this first one here. So the point over there points to this point here. Now I'm going to select this point. Notice its next point is set to none. So I'm going to scoot over to the other point. I'm going to choose the dropper tool and select this point. And now we see that the point over there has its next point set to Patrol Point 2. Now we can tell which patrol point we have selected by seeing its name here in the Details panel, and plus the World Outliner shows us which actor we have selected here. It says Patrol Point 1. So in our world, we have 2 patrol points, and each one has its next point set to the other one. So now we have 2 patrol points. Now, if I hit play, I can't see these patrol points, and of course our drone doesn't move to them yet. We haven't implemented that, but I'd like to be able to see where these patrol points are, and we can use a debug sphere to do that. Let's go back to Patrol Point and right-click and type Begin Play, and use the event Begin Play to draw a debug sphere. There's a function for doing that. It's called Draw Debug Sphere. I'm going to use that function. Now, Draw Debug Sphere requires a center that's the location for the center of the sphere. And our patrol point is an actor, which means it has the function getActorLocation. So we're going to use that and hook that up to the center of the sphere. Now, by default, we have a radius of 100, and we have this segments parameter. That's the number of segments for the sphere. The more segments, the more round and detailed the sphere. We're going to leave it at 12. Now, line color can be changed. We can change this to a nice red color, and the duration is the amount of time this sphere will be drawn for. So we can use, say, 60 seconds for that. And thickness allows us to adjust the thickness of the lines. I'm going to set that to 1, and we'll see what this looks like. Let's compile and hit play. And now we see our patrol points here, as indicated by the debug spheres. So this is a useful tool to show locations of things that you might not be able to see in game. So for your challenge, I'd like you to add more patrol points to our level. Place some patrol points in the level and set the next point variable for each of these, and make sure that each point has its next point set. Pause the video and do this now. Okay, so I have 2 patrol points here. I'd like to add more patrol points, but not too many. I just want a few. I'm not going to populate the entire level just yet. So I'm going to come over here, way over to the end, and add, say, 3 patrol points. I'm going to drag 1 in here. I'm going to drag 1 in over here, and a 3rd patrol point here. And I'd like these to be a loop. So I'm going to select the first patrol point, scoot on over to the second, and use my dropper tool to select that for the next point. Now I'm going to select this second point and come on over here to the 3rd one and use the dropper tool to select that. And I'm going to select the 3rd point and scoot on over back to the first one and use my dropper tool to select it. So now I have another group of points. These 3 form a loop. And to make this easier to organize, I'm going to take these last 3 points, select them, and right-click. And down here where it says Move To, I can create a new folder and call this Point Loop 2. So now these 3 patrol points are in this Point Loop 2 folder. Now that must mean that I have a Point Loop 1. That's these 2 points here. So I'm going to select these 2, right-click, Move To, create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Point Loop 1. This way it'll be easy to know which patrol points are grouped together. Great. Now if I hit play, I can see all of my patrol points. I have 2 patrol points here and 3 patrol points over there. Great. All right, so we now have some patrol points, and we're ready to move our drone to those points, and we're going to learn how to do that in the next lecture. I'll see you soon.